You know, these days there's a lot of different ways to exact perfect boat control for any situation you're going to be fishing. A Talon, a brand new trolling motor up on front where you can follow the contours on the lake mapping, on your graph. These are all great things. You can even have a Vantage in the back that'll back you in up against the corner of a break right into a stiff wind. These boat control items, materials and techniques do make for easier fishing. Quite often they're great walleye solutions. But what about going back to some of the old school techniques? What about drifting? What if you don't have all that fancy equipment? Or maybe drifting is better even when those situations and those materials and equipment is available. I want to talk about drift fishing, and it's something that I still do a fair amount when the conditions call for it. What you're looking for is the perfect kind of wind, really. The kind of wind that creates a little bit of a walleye chop, but isn't blasting you across the lake. If winds are heavy, you can put out a drift sock to slow you down a little bit, but this technique works really well, specifically with two kinds of fishing. Rigging. I've got a rigging rod here up and ready to go. It's probably my favorite go-to technique for doing any kind of drifting, or spinner fishing. If it's a little on the faster end, I prefer spinners. Quite often, it's what it needs to keep the blades moving. You can use a bottom bouncer that's a little bit heavier, keeps you on the bottom. But when we've got a slightly lighter breeze going, rigging is absolutely wonderful. Whether you're putting crawlers, whether you're putting leeches on the business end, even minnows, it's a great way to cover broad areas of water while also picking out some specifics. So what's on the business end? What am I using for my sinker? I use a sliding slip sinker. This is a pretty neat system from Northland. It's called a Rock Runner. Rock Runner slip sinker. And the neat part about this is right now I've got on a 1/2 ounce weight that in rock or any kind of substrate, it's going to walk right over the top of. But the really cool thing is what happens when the wind comes up, as it so often does when we're out drifting over the course of the day. Boom, I pop this sinker off, I reach down and I grab a 3/4 ounce sinker. That was a 1/2 ounce. I move my way up to 3/4, get that thing popped on there. And once I do that, I'm ready to go fish either deeper water or fish when the wind's blowing a little further, but my bait is still going to be on bottom. Now, how about the kinds of spots we should check out? Well, the perfect drift spot to me is a little more broad. Today we've got an east-northeast wind going. It's really blowing down along the length of the shoreline. And the cool part about drift fishing is without pulling crankbaits or pulling spinners under power, this is a great way to find fish on specific spots too. So as I look along this break, I can see that if I position my boat properly at the head of the break here, it's going to drift me down along the edge. Now I can always use the main motor to slide a little closer to shore or slide a little further out, but I want it to bring me across multiple depths, at least at first. I want to start out deep. It's going to bring me close to the shoreline. Then it's going to bring me across this broad flat, this 10 to 12 foot flat. Then it's going to bring me shallow right up against the edge of this point, and then eventually back out to deeper water. If I draw a perfect straight line along that, which is the way the wind will blow me, I'm going to cover variable depths. I'm going to cover different areas, maybe different substrate, and I'm probably going to pick up fish along the way. Now, drifting is great for finding fish, but what happens when we really find them and we want to key in on them? Well, then the key is to shorten up the spans of your drifts. It's great to make a big, long run down a huge shoreline, but when you are catching fish in the same areas again and again, it's wonderful to be able to mark those locations, figure out where they are, even visually. Hey, we're catching them off this point. Shorten up your drifts, or even change to a different technique like vertical jigging or pitching to make sure that you capitalize on the fact that, hey, there weren't fish throughout the whole drift, but maybe we're going to catch them right here on this point. You know, another great location is big, broad flats. These shallow flats oftentimes hold walleyes, especially when we've got good wind. This one in particular I'm looking at, there's a lot of red here territory, a lot of 8, 9, and 10 foot portions to this flat. It's a huge area. It would be great if we get a northeast wind, kind of like what we've got now, to kind of drift us through it and show us where some of the walleyes are throughout. Now, in that scenario, I'm going to be fishing through rock more often than not. I'm probably going to be using that same slip sinker technique with the Rock Runner, Rock Runner weights on it. But what if this were cabbage? What if we were fishing a neck down area and this wasn't rock, and maybe it was central Minnesota or Wisconsin, and we've got these big, great weed beds to fish through? Well, you could basically just trade this thing out, put a bullet nose slip sinker, and work our way through those same areas. You know, so often cabbage grows in clumps, but once you get towards the deeper edge of it, it starts to open up a little bit, create some spaces and pockets for those walleyes. I like pulling rigs through those areas as well. So no matter what you're drifting through, you can rig through these areas, cover water, catch lots of fish, mark where those locations are, whether they be visually or whether they be on a graph, and go back and hit them again. So go ahead and take those to heart, use those techniques, and the next time you're faced with a situation fishing a big broad flat or along a shoreline like that, give drift fishing a try and bring back some of those simpler pleasures, and it's a great way to catch walleyes to this day.